In a world where suits command respect and uniforms go unnoticed, where boardroom titles often overshadow human worth, one woman made a quiet, radical choice. Charlotte Hayes, a seasoned CEO of a luxury hotel empire, invited a janitor to a party meant for the elite. It wasn't a stunt. It was a statement. This is not a tale about charity. It's about dignity. About what shifts when someone in power chooses to cross the line society draws so rigidly. It's also about Marcus Williams, a man who scrubbed floors but carried the heart of a builder. Together, they sparked a movement not with noise, but with presence. Not with rebellion, but with recognition. If you've ever felt unseen or questioned your place in the room, this story is for you. And if you've ever held influence, it might just change how you use it. Keep reading. Something rare begins with something small. On a December morning, as the first snow began to blanket the rooftops and the sky remained misty, as if not yet ready to wake, Charlotte Whitmore stood before the mirror in the penthouse apartment of the Whitmore & Sons Hotel, a family estate she had inherited from her late father. At 42, Charlotte was the embodiment of a successful and solitary woman. Dressed in an amber silk robe, her golden hair neatly pinned up, she looked as though she had stepped out of a vintage portrait. But the eyes in the mirror betrayed no serenity. Those eyes, sharp yet lonely, scrutinized their own reflection, as if searching for a reason to begin yet another day in a long string of meaningless ones. That morning, like every other, Charlotte held a cup of black coffee, the only kind she had drunk since she was 27, and stepped out onto the balcony. The winter wind ran through her hair, numbing her fingertips, but to Charlotte, it was oddly comforting. The cold made her feel something, a sensation her tightly controlled life seldom granted. Directly below, the hotel lobby was abuzz with preparations for the annual Christmas party for the local community, a tradition once upheld every year by her mother before she passed. But this year, Charlotte had delegated the decorating and planning to the new staff, showing no interest in the theme or guest list. A part of her believed that apathy was the final layer of armor keeping her from being hurt. At that very moment, on the ground floor of the hotel, where staff often moved like silent shadows, a man was bent over, meticulously polishing the lobby's glass panels in steady practice circles. His name was Marcus Lane, 35 years old, newly hired that month, a seasonal job to cover rent and help support his pregnant sister. His sun-weathered face and tall frame stood in contrast to his humble posture when passing VIP guests. Marcus was a man of few words, always keeping his head low, except when he thought no one was watching. Just then, Charlotte, standing above, happened to glance down and caught a glint of light reflecting off a freshly cleaned pane of glass. Something curious occurred, not love, not desire, but a flicker of awareness so subtle that Charlotte herself didn't realize her eyes had lingered a moment longer than usual. A few moments earlier, Marcus had also sensed a gaze falling on him from somewhere. Something faint, like warmth on a cold day, distant and delicate, but enough to slow the motion of his hand for a beat. Neither of them knew that this snowy morning would mark the beginning of a thread, a quiet emotional tether between two people living on opposite ends of society. And strangely enough, it was in this place, a five-star hotel that seemed sterile and soulless, where something unexpected was about to stir. A few days later, on the afternoon of December 23rd, with the sunset casting a golden glow across the marble lobby walls, Charlotte stepped out of her 18th floor office for a final inspection of the Christmas party preparations. It wasn't that she truly cared, but a small part of her, just a sliver, needed to prove to herself that she still cared about something. Charlotte walked slowly across the glossy tiled floor, her heels clicking softly with each step. The guests had yet to arrive. Staff were putting the finishing touches in place, strings of twinkling lights, white tablecloths with red trim, a buffet table filled with cinnamon and apples. Then, a small mishap occurred. A decorative Christmas tree near the main entrance tilted under a gust of wind, knocking over a tray of glass candles beside it. People rushed over in panic to clean it up, but the first to react was Marcus, the janitor, who caught the tray with his bare hands just before it could shatter. Quick reflexes, focused eyes. In that moment, Charlotte, standing on the nearby staircase, couldn't help but notice the way Marcus handled the situation. No panic, no fear. "You're Marcus, right?" Charlotte's voice rang out, clear enough to make everyone pause briefly. Marcus straightened up, surprised to hear the owner say his name. "Yes, ma'am." Charlotte was silent for a few seconds, her eyes resting on his hands, now covered in bits of wax. Then she spoke, gently, yet firmly. "Do you own a suit?" Marcus froze. "I'm not sure I understand." Charlotte tilted her head slightly, her gaze unreadable. "Tomorrow evening's party. I think it would be nice if a few staff members attended. I want you to be one of them." Marcus was taken aback, momentarily lost for words. Behind Charlotte's cool demeanor, her voice didn't carry pity. It carried curiosity, or maybe a challenge. "I don't think I belong there." He was honest, his fingers lacing together, an old habit when nervous. "I'll have someone get you a suit. It might not fit perfectly, but it'll do. Just be there at 7 in the grand lobby." Charlotte turned away, her voice calm. And Marcus, try not to lose the invitation. That evening, in their small apartment on the west side, Marcus told his sister, Sophia, everything. She was 7 months pregnant, seated on the sofa with a knitted blanket across her lap, her eyes wide with disbelief. "She invited you? The hotel owner?" "Yeah." And she seemed serious, not joking at all. Marcus scratched his head. He was still confused. Sophia smiled, her eyes a mix of pride and mischief. "Then go. For heaven's sake, Marcus. You've spent your whole life turning down opportunities. Just this once, don't." Marcus looked at his sister, the one person who made him feel like he mattered, and quietly nodded. The next morning, when he found the suit hanging in a garment bag outside their door, Marcus ran his hand over the soft fabric, almost afraid to open it. Inside was a small card, written in elegant, delicate handwriting, 700 sharp. "And let yourself be exactly who you are, Charlotte." For the first time in years, Marcus smiled at his reflection in the mirror. He had never seen himself as a well-dressed man. But tonight, he would try, because someone had seen something in him, even before he believed he was worthy of it. On the evening of December 24th, New York dressed in its brightest attire of the year. Along Fifth Avenue, every store window and street corner sparkled with light. Snow began to fall gently, not in a flurry, but slowly, deliberately, as if inviting everyone to savor each flake. In the grand lobby of the Lambert Hotel, the Christmas party had begun. Guests arrived one by one, dressed impeccably, while the gentle sound of jazz floated from the piano in the corner of the room. At 5 minutes to 7, Marcus stood silently on the steps outside the hotel. His hands were tucked into his coat pockets, the cold seeping through his shirt collar, making him shiver slightly. But it wasn't the weather, it was the familiar grip of fear returning. He had nearly turned away. But then, the golden light spilling from the lobby caught his reflection in the glass doors. Upright posture, head held high, a well-fitted suit. At exactly 7 o'clock, Marcus stepped inside. All eyes turned to him, not because of who he was, but because he was different. No one knew he was part of the janitorial staff, but he also didn't quite look like one of them. From across the room, Charlotte had just set down her glass of wine when she caught that look. The look of a man trying to steady himself in a place that didn't feel like his own. Their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Charlotte gave a slight nod, not a greeting, but an acknowledgement. Marcus approached. He bowed slightly, not too low, not too awkward. "Thank you for the invitation," he said, his voice even, low and sincere. I've never been to a place like this." Charlotte's lips curved, not quite a smile, but a softening. "I've never invited anyone like you either." In that moment, amidst the flickering candlelight and the murmurs of polite conversation, something in Charlotte's gaze gentled. She wasn't looking at Marcus like a social experiment. She was seeing a person with genuine curiosity, not pretense. A moment later, someone approached to make conversation. Marcus stepped back, intending to head toward the buffet, but Charlotte spoke softly. "Don't go. Stay here. I may need an excuse to escape these tedious conversations." The man who once scrubbed basement hallways didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. But he stayed. Hours later, between practiced smiles and clinking glasses, Charlotte led Marcus out to the second-floor balcony, a quiet space where few people wandered. The air was colder now, the snow falling heavier, but neither of them spoke. After a while, Charlotte said, almost in a whisper, "When I was your age, I missed out on something important because I thought I didn't belong. It took me years to realize. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. I had just believed in how others saw me." Marcus turned to her, catching her gaze. It wasn't cold. It wasn't superior. It was unguarded. "Why did you choose me?" he asked. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she replied, deliberately, each word measured, because I wanted to see if people, when placed in the right moment, could rise above the way the world sees them. Marcus smiled, a smile filled with both gratitude and understanding. And you're looking for proof. Charlotte nodded. Then, softly, she corrected herself. No, I'm just giving myself permission to believe again. Below, the sound of church bells rang out into the night. The two of them, a seemingly cold-hearted businesswoman and a man from the service corridors, stood in silence. Nothing more was said, nothing more needed to be said, because both knew tonight wasn't just a party. It was the first time in years that someone had been truly seen for who they were. On the morning of December 26th, while the echoes of Christmas still lingered in the hotel windows, on the 22nd floor, where the executive offices of the Lambert Corporation were located, the atmosphere had turned noticeably cold. Charlotte entered the boardroom with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. She knew this morning's meeting wouldn't be easy. Not after Douglas Merrick, the chairman of the board, had sent an email late the previous night with a terse subject line about last night's uninvited guest. 8:05 a.m. Charlotte took her seat. All eyes turned toward her, not with reverence, but with scrutiny, especially the cold, piercing gaze of Douglas Merrick, a man who was once her ally and now lingered like a shadow, waiting for the right moment to strike. Charlotte, he began, his voice slow and controlled, yet sharp enough to silence the room. Would you care to explain why you brought a janitor to a party meant for high-profile investors? No one came to her defense. Even her trusted assistant lowered their head in silence. Just a few seconds, but to her, it felt as long as an entire winter afternoon. Charlotte set her coffee down, her posture calm and steady. But beneath the table, her fingers tightened ever so slightly. Because I wanted people to see what we've long forgotten, she said, locking eyes with Douglas. That not everyone wearing an Armani suit has value, and not everyone cleaning the floors lacks it. A chair scraped quietly to her left. A board member furrowed his brow. Douglas gave a curt laugh. The issue isn't the message, Charlotte. The issue is the image. Our Japanese investors have pulled out of the Asia expansion deal because they saw a man of unknown origin standing next to you at the company Christmas gala. Charlotte didn't respond immediately. She inhaled, slow, deep. In her mind was the image of Marcus on the balcony that Christmas Eve. His eyes when he had asked, "Why me?" still echoed. "Maybe," she said. "We should care more about the values we aim to build, not the prejudices others expect us to uphold." Douglas laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. "Ideals don't feed stock prices, Charlotte. We need you to choose, step away from this, or step down as CEO." The room grew noticeably colder. She understood. The ultimatum had been delivered. At that same moment, in a Bronx neighborhood, Marcus was polishing the display glass inside a local church. Since Christmas night, he hadn't returned to the hotel. Not because he was fired. He had requested a few days off. He needed time to think. Charlotte was no longer the distant figure from the security monitors. She was the one who had brought him into the light. But now, that same light seemed to be burning her. Marcus knew this. He saw it in her eyes when she said goodbye that night, warm but hesitant, as if something had been left unsaid. His phone buzzed in his pocket. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Marcus." "It's me, Charlotte." He straightened instinctively, as if being called on during work. "I was just about to call you. I just wanted to let you know. There may be some changes at the hotel. If you hear any rumors, don't panic. I'll be okay." There was a pause. Then Charlotte added, her voice lower this time, "But if everything slips out of my hands, you need to understand something. I never saw you as part of some game. You reminded me of why I started, why I wanted to change this industry." Marcus swallowed hard. A strange feeling rose within him, gratitude laced with anger. Not at her, at the system that forced people to choose between integrity and position. He took a breath. "Then let me do something for you this time." Charlotte paused. "Marcus, this isn't simple anymore." "That's exactly why," he replied. "I can't keep being the one on the sidelines." That evening, as whispers began to circulate through the media about a quiet rebellion within the Lambert Group's leadership, Marcus Williams sat at a desk in a quiet corner of Brooklyn, writing a letter. Not for the press, not for attention, but for people like him, for those who had once been deemed unworthy of holding their heads high in rooms full of light. On the morning of December 29th, the Lambert Tower was glowing with lights. marking the beginning of the annual year-end press conference, the event where the company would announce its strategy for the upcoming year. It was broadcast live, with shareholders, journalists, and industry guests in attendance. But this year was different. Rumors of an internal crisis had drawn every gaze to the CEO's chair, and the woman occupying it, Charlotte Hayes. At 8:57 a.m., Charlotte stood backstage, dressed in a classic navy blue suit. Her hand gripped a folder of documents, her gaze piercing through the velvet curtain as if measuring the distance between herself and a silent battle. Not far away, Marcus Williams, wearing a simple white shirt, slipped into the hall through the side entrance reserved for staff. He carried nothing but a small USB drive and a deep sense of purpose. At 9:00 a.m., the press conference began. Charlotte walked onto the stage to a round of tepid applause, not from disrespect, but from anticipation. People were waiting for something to break. She began her speech as usual: growth numbers, expansion plans, achievements from the past year. But then, mid-sentence, she stopped. "Before I continue," Charlotte said, her voice sharpened, "I have a video I'd like to share with you, a reminder of what we truly represent." She nodded to the technician. The screen behind her changed. The large monitor lit up. There, projected for all to see, was Marcus, sitting in the community church in the Bronx, soft light cutting through the old window panes. His voice rang out, simple, grounded, and powerful. "My name is Marcus Williams. At Lambert, I mop floors and clean restrooms. But I'm also a brother, a son, and someone who once studied architecture before my mother passed. I'm not a special case. There are hundreds of people in this industry with their own stories. We don't need favors, just to be seen, to be respected. And if a CEO can see that in me, then why can't the whole system?" The entire room fell silent. When the screen went dark, no one spoke for a few seconds. Then Charlotte lifted her head. "I invited Marcus to the Christmas party," she said clearly, "not to cause a stir, but to remind myself, and this entire system, that value does not lie in paychecks or nameplates." A murmur rippled through the room. Douglas shot up from his seat. "What are you doing, Charlotte? Throwing the entire company's credibility away over a janitor?" She turned to him, her gaze unshaken. "No, I'm preserving the last shred of dignity we have left." He opened his mouth to argue, but at that very moment, something no one expected happened. Marcus stepped forward. He walked slowly toward the stage. Every eye followed his steps as if mesmerized. He took the microphone, his voice low but steady. "Apologies for the interruption. I just have one thing to say." He turned to Charlotte. "If she's being pushed to resign simply because she treated me like a human being, then that is the worst decision this leadership has ever made." Then he faced the crowd. "And if a billion-dollar corporation can't recognize the dignity of the very people who keep it running every day, then it has no business sitting in rooms like this." Silence. Then applause. Sparse at first, then rising. An elderly shareholder stood, then another. Charlotte remained still, her eyes wide in surprise, then softening with emotion, as if, for the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight alone, but standing beside someone. Douglas said nothing. He knew this battle was over. The meeting ended, but no one was talking about numbers or fiscal plans. People talked about the video, about the janitor who stepped onto the stage, about a veteran CEO who had once been criticized for being too sentimental, yet delivered the most valuable lesson the corporate world could learn. Dignity does not have a hierarchy. That night, as New York stepped into the final days of the year, Charlotte and Marcus sat together in his small kitchen. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked, pouring more tea into her cup. Charlotte smiled, gazing out the window where the city lights flickered softly. "If I could do it all over again, I'd still invite you to that party," she replied. "Because no one deserves to be hidden in the corners of this world just because they wear a different uniform." Marcus said nothing, but something inside him had changed forever. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged. A few weeks after the year-end press conference, the weather in New York turned colder than usual. Snow fell lightly on the brownstone rooftops of Harlem. In a modest cafe tucked on the corner of 115th Street, Charlotte Hayes sat by the window, holding a thick book, though her eyes wandered outside. In front of her sat 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with cream. Marcus walked in just as the door's wind chime jingled. He shook off his wool scarf, smiling softly when he saw Charlotte already waiting. "You're always early," he said, pulling out the chair across from her. Charlotte smiled gently. "I used to manage a corporation. Now I just manage my own time." They sat in silence for a few seconds, as if listening to something that required no words. Since the press conference, everything had changed, quietly but profoundly. Charlotte submitted her resignation, not because she was forced out, but as a deliberate choice. She told the press, "I've served Lambert for nearly half my life. Now it's time to pass it on to a generation that values connection over control." Instead of retiring, Charlotte began a community project, a free career mentorship program for blue-collar workers, a place where people could learn how to write a resume, practice interviews, and most importantly, learn to believe that they had value. Her co-founder, Marcus Williams. By March, the community center room in Harlem buzzed with voices and laughter. A small class was in session. Charlotte was guiding a middle-aged woman on how to frame her cleaning experience as professional skill sets. Marcus was listening attentively to a young man talk about his dream of becoming a refrigeration technician. The two of them, one who once sat in a CEO's chair, the other who once mopped the hotel floors, now stood side by side, rebuilding a different kind of foundation. Not for a corporation, but for the people the system had long overlooked. One early April evening, after class had wrapped up, Charlotte and Marcus sat again at their familiar cafe. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small envelope, and placed it on the table. "You should open this," he said. Charlotte did. Inside was an invitation card, grand opening, the Bridge Employment Resource Center, April 2020. In the corner, a small inscription, "For Charlotte Hayes, the first to cross the line." Charlotte didn't say anything. She stared at the card for a long time, then looked at Marcus. "You named it the Bridge, because that's what you did," Marcus replied, his eyes shining. "You built a bridge instead of a wall." On the day of the opening, there was no red carpet, no flashing cameras, but there were flowers, there were teary eyes, there were hands clasped tightly, and there was a short, heartfelt speech. "I used to think that people in high positions didn't see folks like me, but maybe. Sometimes they just hadn't been taught how to look. The first bridge doesn't need to be big. It just needs someone willing to lay the first brick. Thank you, Charlotte, for not just seeing me, but for helping me see myself." Marcus ended to a round of applause, and even a few tears. Charlotte stood beside him, quietly taking his hand in hers. 1 year later, the bridge had helped more than 300 people secure stable jobs. Some had begun trade school. Some returned as volunteers. Charlotte still showed up every week. She said she had never felt so diligent, even when she was a CEO, but had never felt this right before. As for Marcus, he completed his evening program in structural engineering on a scholarship funded by the center itself. But the greatest thing he gained wasn't a degree, it was dignity. In a society where titles and status often overshadow character, the bridge stood as living proof. Status does not define a person's worth. How we treat others, that's the real measure. Charlotte and Marcus, two people once thought to live in opposite worlds, had proven that change can begin with a party, with an honest conversation, with one brave decision, and that, no matter where we come from, every person deserves to be seen, heard, and respected. If you've ever felt invisible in this world, remember, the first bridge can be built with just a kind word. And if you're someone in power, don't forget, there are hands ready to build that bridge with you, as long as you're willing to take the first step.